Alrighty, I think we're just about ready to get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you today for joining us on today's episode of Ask the Expert. We're really excited to get started. So let me introduce 10K CEO Nick Hamm.
Thank you very much, Molly, and welcome everybody. Thank you very much for taking time out of your day to join us today. Really excited for this episode. I think it's very timely, and I think we have some awesome guests that you're going to get some great knowledge out of. I know I have just in the times that I've talked to them preparing for this webinar. So excited to get started. So today I'm joined by Liz and Sarah from Montage Learning. As Molly said, I'm Nick Hamm. I'm the CEO of 10K Advisors. We are an on-demand consultancy. And actually, Liz and Sarah, we're fortunate to have them as members of our community that help us out specifically with change management for a lot of our clients. I guess Liz, Sarah, maybe take a second to introduce yourselves to the group, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
I can go first. Welcome, everyone. I'm Liz Hellinga, co-founder of Montage. I sort of grew up in the Salesforce industry, and learning and development was always at the core of my career advancement. And so it sort of led me to collaborate with Sarah and found Montage, where we can bring L&D to other businesses so they can grow their internal employees as well as their clients.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I am the co-founder of Montage Learning with Liz. I have been working in the L&D space for over 10 years. I've worked for sort of big international firms as well as smaller nonprofits. So I've seen a lot of different companies and businesses and the way that they run and how L&D can really help with that change management for any size company, regardless of their industry. So I'm really excited to be here today to talk about change management.
Awesome. And Molly, I realize I kind of skipped over the slide before this, but one of the reasons that we wanted to talk about this now, two reasons. First of all, I think we've all probably undergone more change in the last 6 months or so than maybe any previous 6-month period in our lives, both probably personally and from a business standpoint. As you see on the screen now, change management was one of the key pillars of the operational excellence handbook that we released here a few months back. And I really thought there was nobody better to speak on that topic and talk about strategies for how you can build that, whether you have a COE or not, than Liz and Sarah. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So kind of segueing into, the fact that we have all undergone a lot of change over the last 6 months or so. And, obviously we'll focus more on the business side here. I think in my kind of experience, a lot of companies seem to think, well, change management's really something that big companies do. I'm a small company. I'm 10, 100, 500 employees. We don't have an L&D group. I don't even really know what L&D means. What is change management just for big companies? And why or why not? Would love to hear your feedback on that.
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. I mentioned in my intro that I've worked for a lot of different size companies, and it definitely is not just for the larger companies. I think, when we're working in a smaller company, we're a little bit more agile, we can move a little bit quicker, and so it may seem that change management and change is easier and that we can just kind of speed through it, and it's fine, there are fewer people, they can catch up. But I think that we need to be really cautious about that. We need to treat change, no matter what size company, we need to treat it with care and thoughtfulness. Because, just because there are fewer people affected or you seem that you can do it a little bit more quickly, it doesn't mean that the people are less invested in why the change is happening and how it will affect them. So I think that's definitely something to keep in mind.
Liz, do you agree with all of that? Do you have anything to add?
100%. And I'll also add that what's getting to your point about change management for smaller organizations, change management is really about building trust to get people to go on that change journey with you. So the sooner you start to develop those practices, the more likely your stakeholders and your employees and your team and whoever's involved in whatever big change you're doing, the more likely they are going to be able to hop on that journey with you. They'll have less resistance. So no matter your size, whether you're a small company, large company, little project, big project, the sooner that you can implement some form of change management best practices or skills, the better it is for your organization and for the success of your company and ultimately support your customers. Because really it's always about how most companies evolve, right, to support their customers. So it's really about how can you do this change effectively so you can help grow your business and support your customers.
Awesome. So I'll assume we have kind of a mix of attendees here that maybe have different levels of maturity with change management, right? I'm going to assume that maybe most folks attending don't have a huge change management function within their organization. If you do and you have specific questions about that, obviously everyone we invite you to ask. But let's say that I'm just kind of getting started on the change management journey at my company. What would you say are kind of a few of the key components that I should start thinking about conceptually, and maybe where should I start on that journey?
First, let me back up because I realized that we didn't define change management for everyone. So I do want to define it so that people understand like where we're springboarding to. So change management is the set of the tools, the resources, the processes, the skills, and principles for managing the people side of change to achieve, your specific outcomes of the project or initiative. And I want to underscore people because really a lot of times, especially in tech, especially in Salesforce, we are focused on the change that we're building in the applications. Like what processes are we automating or what are we integrating with? And change management is really about people and adoption and getting them on board. So I just wanted to level set on that, sorry. But, there's, in terms of things that you can do today to start enabling effective change, well, there's a lot. So there's 5 that I really like to focus on that I share often with admins, especially those new to being a Salesforce admin, is to really understand and communicate the why around the change. We've all been there where something gets changed in your company and you ask somebody, well, why is this changing? And they're like, oh, because the CEO said we had to, or the vice president said we had to do this. And it's really not satisfying. So as a Salesforce admin, as you're trying to build trust to help people adopt your change, understanding and communicating the why is imperative. It's essential to doing that. Planning goes into that. Knowing your stakeholders, I could probably do a whole session on stakeholders, Nick. Communication, and then lastly, like empathy and listening. Those are 5 areas that you could pick one of those things to start doing today. I mean, that you literally could do as soon as you get off this call to start enabling more effective change.
So you mentioned something there that I think is really interesting, and I've said this so many times, or I could say I've even asked this question so many times when I walk into a situation and there's poor adoption of the application. Maybe the first question I'll ask is, does your CEO use the application? And that's always a very telling answer. Whether or not the executives are behind it. And I think to some extent having executive buy-in is crucial to adoption, but would you say that's the one thing that's going to really move the needle on adoption and change management? What other roles in the organization are important to have on board and engaged as part of a change management process?
From a stakeholder perspective, yes, right. Having executive support is essential, but I also think that having your super users that can be your internal champions are huge, like identifying them at the beginning of a process so that maybe you can engage them throughout the process. You're probably already talking to them if you're building out user stories. Just understanding who else can help champion the change, who's excited about it, and keep, fanning the flames of that excitement.
Yeah, and I'll say I totally agree. And, those are the people who, even maybe more so than an executive, they're going to get other people excited. And they're the ones who, to your point, Nick, they're actually using it. Maybe sometimes the executives aren't. But those people who are at every level, if they're excited about it, they're going to generate more excitement among their peers and their colleagues. And I think it's extremely important. You can't overstate that enough.
So when you talk about building trust and building trust with stakeholders and finding out kind of who your stakeholders are, can we talk about some tactics that that you would use? Say we have a big project coming up, right? We are implementing work.com. It's a huge change for our organization. How would you go about that change? Or how would you, like, if I'm a client coming to you and saying, hey, we're implementing work.com, this is huge for our company, what do I do, right? Where would you start with something like that?
From a stakeholder perspective, there's a couple of things that I always suggest you do when you're enabling or you're on a project. Try to understand anybody who's involved in the process, right? But what I like to do is, and it can be tedious sometimes, is sort of start to map out the process, because you are changing a process and you kind of have to know a little bit about where they're at, and understand who's involved in that process. And then if you have time and resources, start to ask those that are in the process who else should be involved. Because really a stakeholder, this is a term from the Project Management Institute, is a stakeholder is anybody who has an interest in your project. It could be a perceived interest, and you may not necessarily agree that they should have an interest in it, but a stakeholder is anyone that's involved in it. And the better that you understand who they are and find them, leave no rock unturned, the better it is for the project in the long run. Because at the core of it, you need to be able to effectively communicate with them.
Yeah, I implemented, this is probably 2 years ago at this point, but this really big project, and it would be similar to work.com. Like it's gonna touch everyone, right? The very first thing that I did with my team is we did a stakeholder map, an analysis of the entire company, every single department, everybody within the department that we think by Lizz's definition would be a stakeholder. And we took a giant whiteboard and took a couple hours and did it. And then from there, we created our plan about how we're going to start to communicate with them. But I think, there can be one stakeholder that, has the ear of a lot of people that you never talk to, and they use it in a different way, and you go down a path, and halfway down that path, they're like, wait a minute, this isn't going to work for us. And then you have to kind of come back, to the start. So you don't want to do that when you're implementing a big project or even a small one. So yeah, stakeholder analysis is really key.
So you all talked about stakeholder analysis, understanding who's going to be affected, or maybe not even directly, but indirectly, like you said, like asking kind of maybe who you think are the core stakeholders. Who else do you think, right? I think that's a really key point. And the communication obviously is key. Communicating to those stakeholders. One of the other things that you mentioned, Liz, was empathy and being an active listener. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe why that's important?
I think listening is probably the most underrated skill for admins and for Salesforce consultants. Empathy on, I always say, click a mile in somebody's shoe. Like, sit and watch what they're doing, shadowing them, understanding like the pain points, whether it's in the system that you've already created or a system that you're going to create, like really getting to the core of like, how much swivel desking are they doing? Like, are they toggling between like 5 different apps? Are they taking phone calls? What do they have to click on this field that's on buried 3 pages away? Like, having a little bit of empathy about, what your end users and stakeholders are going through is important. One of my new favorite terms, although it's a riff on an old term, is SABSA, Salesforce by zooming around. So we used to have SABA by Mike Gerholt. So we've modified it for the pandemic times, but scheduling a few minutes, people will feel so valued, and it builds that trust with them. So having empathy, spending a bit of time with them builds trust, so that maybe they're annoyed by a pick list value that you had to remove, 3 months ago, but you were transparent and you talked about the why. When you go to maybe automate a process that they're not fully comfortable with, they may be more inclined because you were transparent and upfront about those changes. You're building trust. And that's really what you need to do. And listening and empathy are at the core of that. We all want to be heard. Oh, you're muted.
Like you said, it helps build that trust. And it really all comes back down to that level of trust. And people are going to trust you if they trust that you care, right, about their experience and what's important to them. So let's kind of put ourselves in the shoes of a solo admin, right, who is trying to affect a huge change in their organization. They're understanding their stakeholders and mapping out who those folks are and understanding the super users. Obviously, for a huge change, it's very difficult for one person to do everything, right? So can you maybe talk a little bit about how else you can leverage those stakeholders and those super users to really help you be more effective as, say, a solo admin?
Yes, I love super users. I've been a solo admin. Super users are great. It's a fantastic way to empower your colleagues, right? Giving them an opportunity to share information. One of the things as a solo admin that you have to decide, particularly around, change management, is who should the communication come from. And sometimes you'll be like, oh, it needs to be top down. It needs to come from the executive, but it can sometimes feel a little harsh. It's like, those things people say, like, if it's not in Salesforce, it didn't happen. But even coming from an admin, sometimes it could be feel a little top down. But when you have a super user that is a peer and a colleague of other end users, leading that messaging, I think it has a bigger impact. If you can get them like excited and empowered, maybe the other end user are gonna be like, I want to be that person. I want to be the next one to roll out some of these fun, or communicate some of these fun changes. I think it's understanding the stakeholders and knowing, who you could elevate a little bit through giving them an opportunity to communicate.
Got it. So staying on kind of the solo admin train, or maybe not even a solo admin, but a small team who just has so much on their plate, right? As I know a lot of us do. When is it time to bring in an outside firm like you guys? Obviously, you've built a business out of change management. I assume you don't just work with all huge enterprises. Maybe you do, right? And maybe you could talk a little bit about that, right? Why are companies coming to a company like yours? And what are kind of the key indicators of the things that are kind of like when the light bulb goes off, it's like, yes, we should call a company like this to help us because this is either more than we can handle outside of our area of expertise, or tell us a little bit about why companies are approaching you and how you're helping.
Yeah, I can start, and Liz, you can jump in. I think that there are a few reasons why any company would want to bring in an outside firm like Montage. The first is really when the change is big, right? If you're planning for more than like 30 to 60 days of a rollout and, training people and all of that, oftentimes, you're going to need that extra support. And, you might have, the second one is that you might have some, limited bandwidth, right? So like you said, you're a small team, you have a ton to do, you don't have time to really, strategically put this change in place in a really meaningful way that you're going to see a lot of adoption. I think the third one is, if your team lacks the skills or experience around change management, it's going to be really important to bring in an outside company like ours to really help you focus and be that outside voice, right? That can ask you questions and get you on the right track down the path of change. Liz, do you have anything to add?
No, I think from your, just to build a little bit upon your skill set question or comment, was that not everybody has change management skills. And if the change is that important, you need change management to be able to make sure that it's fully realized. And so it is an investment sometimes. So it's also an opportunity to invest in some of your employees to help get them leveled up on change management. For me, I think that change management skills are probably, like, combined with like your amazing Salesforce skills, are one of the best ways to elevate an admin's career. So like whether your company provides change management training to you or you have to go out and get it on your own, I suggest, investing in yourself to become, at least even just read a book about it, because there will be things that you can apply from the book or from today's session to help you be what I like to call a change enabler.
Well, so much of what you all have said, building trust, understanding your stakeholders, being able to communicate effectively and actually affect change in an organization are all of the all things that are hallmarks of a successful executive in a company, right? Those are really things that, whether you're the CEO, CMO, CFO, VP of sales, director of IT, any sort of management position, those are all really things that you need to be effective. And so I think that's actually a really crucial point as far as expanding your skill set as an admin outside of the technology, right? That is obviously an excellent way to give yourself a great career path outside of an admin, if that's what you're looking for as far as your journey goes. So I think that's really good. So let's talk a little bit. We talked about the strategy. What are kind of the key things that you need to be looking at? I'll do one more strategy question, and then we'll kind of get into some tactics. How do you know, and this may seem like an obvious question, but I think it can go a little bit deeper. How do you know if your change is actually effective?
Well, at the beginning of the project, you should probably determine what the KPIs are going to be. I mean, so I think the change management really aligns to what you're expecting the end users to do. If you're thinking Salesforce, for example, a few weeks ago, I rolled out a brand new record type. We had to do some training on it. I used in-app guidance prompts, a prompt to help, educate on it, did some videos and stuff to support the change. But, the best way to measure it is by the number of opportunities created and how quickly they're, adding them to Salesforce and who's adding them to Salesforce. So those were the KPIs that I used to measure it. Like, are they adopting it? And that's the beauty of, like, especially when you're enabling change around Salesforce, there's already built-in ways to measure everything. You can do the reports and dashboards. But you need to agree upon those metrics with your stakeholders. And I don't know why you would do a project without having like a set of like metrics or things that you're trying to see different. Like, the whole point of the project is to move to something new, to do something different.
Yeah, I totally agree, Liz. But I think, oftentimes we do see people who don't set those metrics, and that's where you can get into trouble down the line. And not only can you get into trouble down the line, but on the flip side, when you want to do an even bigger change, if you have these smaller changes that you've done and you've shown the value of those changes and the actual impact of them, you're going to have a lot more buy-in from everyone when you want to do something bigger. So I think setting those KPIs and those goals for every project are so important.
And I know we all kind of laughed about it, but I don't think any of us are surprised at how few people actually do that intentionally, outside of, maybe a few small things. But I think a lot of folks, when we're initiating a project, we're so focused on, well, this is my mandate. I have to get this done because this is what I was told to do. I have this amount of budget. I have this amount of time. So much pressure just to get all of that done. Like, maybe I don't really care if people use it or not because I've been told to do it, and it doesn't fall on me, right? But ultimately, as a good, well-rounded consultant or a good, well-rounded admin, certainly those are things that I should be thinking about, whether those KPIs have been put onto my plate or given to me or anything like that, right? So.
Yeah, and as an admin, feel empowered to ask those questions. Feel empowered to say, what does this success look like? How are we going to measure this for you? You're the one building it. You can ask those questions.
And to the point
and it's great for your resume too. Sorry.
Exactly where I was going. I mean, to the point of building your career, right? Showing that you have a proven track record of successful projects versus just saying I did 100 projects is totally different when you can go back and say I did 100 projects versus, I increased user adoption 100% across this department or whatever it might be, right? And you have proof of that. That's very, very powerful. So getting into the tactics a little bit, communication is a wide topic, right? We could probably do a whole webinar just on communication, but kind of focusing again on like smaller teams, solo admins, what are some of the communication tactics that you all have seen or you all have used that you found to be effective?
For me, it's when I was a solo admin, I found comfort in creating like a predictable plan of like for every change. So it's only mainly so I could start to set people's expectations around that. So, depending on the scale of change, like, do we need to do recordings? Do we need to do like quick sheet walkthroughs? I would look through the changes and figure out, like, if I'm adding a pick list value, which sometimes is like a big change to people. But like, why are we adding this pick list value? What is the need? Is it best to do a chatter post? Are people reading their email? Is it best that you ask somebody, one of your champions to, mention it in the team meeting? But creating like a predictable plan, and even doing, like, I know it's weird to maybe do like a weekly digest of your like changes so that people can see what's going on, almost a little bit like release management. But creating a predictable plan of what you need to do so that when people come to you for change, they know that you're going to communicate in these methods.
Sarah,
yeah, I was just going to say, Liz says this a lot, and I think it's great for everybody to hear, is to meet your users where they're comfortable, not necessarily where you want to bring them, right? You need to meet them where they're comfortable and where they are. So you're making sure that you're getting this change in front of them and the relevant information that they need.
That's a very good point. So learning and development, which is another key point of change management, especially maybe things that are larger than a pick list change, right? Where you're implementing a whole new application or a whole new process. What are some of the tools? I mean, you can go from like, I don't have any budget to like my company's giving me a blank checkbook, right? What are some of the tools that you all have seen that have been effective in your careers?
Well, there's two things I've been using a lot of lately. One of them is the in-app guidance prompts. I like, that's the prompt, like the single prompt is a free feature that's available to everyone in Salesforce. And you can put it on a page and you can set by profile who it shows up to, how often it shows up, for what duration. Maybe you just put out a pick list value and you just, you want them to remind them of what it means. Then you can use the prompt to do that. The other thing, I've been doing a lot of video, and I've invested in Camtasia, which is a video editing tool, and it's very easy to use so that you can do some of these recordings of like step throughs of what you're showing people to do, because really you want people to, like, when they're in the thick of things, know where to go to get their answer. Much like as an admin, we go to Google or we go to the Trailblazer community to find answers to our questions. You want your end users to know where they can go, whether it's a Google Drive, or if you have SharePoint, or if it's within Salesforce and, you know, content. You just have to start to set their expectations of where they can find the answers.
Yeah, and I think, you know, going back to what you said, Liz, about having that predictable plan, I think, you know, Nick, if somebody has budget for this and they aren't really sure how to spend it, I think getting outside help to define what that predictable plan can be, and to take a look at, you know, what tools do you have, what tools could be useful to you. Like, you know, Liz is absolutely obsessed with Camtasia right now. I love it. But having that outside help, you know, to kind of focus you and make sure that you have the right plan for your people and your company and your stakeholders and the changes that you want to make, I think that is a great use of some budget when you're making changes.
We're getting to the last few minutes, so I definitely want to invite all the attendees. If you have any questions, just put those in there. We'll field as many as we can in the time we have left. While maybe some people are racking their brains for some great questions to stump you all, our last webinar, we talked a little bit about My Trailhead and on the need for ongoing learning. Have you all seen any companies successfully use that as part of their change management strategy?
I'll let you go, Sarah.
Okay, I'll go. Yes, actually. So Liz and I actually were both in the pilot program for My Trailhead with Salesforce, and we used My Trailhead to completely revamp onboarding for a company. It's a SI, the one that we used to work for. And that was done with My Trailhead. We moved all of our onboarding that is like, you know, day one kind of stuff, like, what is this company? What do they do? What are their values? How do you log into Zoom? Like all those kinds of things. We moved all of that online into My Trailhead. And so people could go through at their own pace. They could come back and reference it. And they had all the information that they needed. And then we turned our in-person orientation, which we know is really not happening right now, but we turned the in-person orientation into more of a cultural immersion. And we had some amazing statistics come out of that. We reduced the cost around orientation by 50%, just moving it to My Trailhead, which was incredible. We also reduced the amount of questions that we had from new hires by, I think that around like 75, 78%. We used to have a Slack group just for new hires. You know, it's like, put all your dumb newbie questions here and we'll answer them. You don't have to bother anybody with them. After a few months, we shut that down because we didn't even need it anymore. So My Trailhead is very powerful, and it can be a very powerful tool when you want to implement change. So yeah, we love it. I love My Trailhead. What about you, Liz? Anything to add to that?
No, I mean, it's the power of Trailhead within your company. I mean, and now, I mean, you can even use it with your community. If you have a community, you can use it with your community to engage, you know, whether it's your partners or your customers. It's quite powerful.
I would probably ask you all your opinion on, you know, is it powerful if you know, maybe I don't have an L&D background, or is it more tailored, or would it be more powerful if I did have that background, someone with that background? What do I need to be effective with My Trailhead, I guess?
An L&D background is, I think, invaluable, or at least understanding L&D principles is invaluable, because you need to understand how to define learning objectives. You know, Trailhead is magical, but they have clearly defined learning objectives for each of those modules. And that takes a bit to do because you need to align, maybe if you're building out a trail, you know, Sarah and I we've built out industry training trails, and you have to be really specific on what you want the learner to do as a result of completing those modules. So having some of that background, and also, and I really do love the platform of My Trailhead, but you also need to think about what you envelope it with, because it's a part of your training strategy. It's not the only training strategy. So you have to think about, like, is there coaching that can be involved? If you're like enabling sales team members using My Trailhead, do you need to have them do some stand and deliver after they complete, you know, a trail on a new product or something like that? So I do think it's invaluable, but it's not something that you can't acquire on your own if you spend some time learning it.
Great feedback. So we did have one question around how change management differs in the era of COVID-19. And, you know, I guess what that implies is, how do you effectively manage change remotely for distributed teams who are not all in an office where you can go to your neighbor or that super user across the cube or whatever it might be? What are some of the tactics that you all have seen companies adjust to?
Well, I'll jump in with one. I think, you know, we talked about this at the very beginning, but the fact that empathy is so important with change, and especially now, I think that we are seeing that across the board, and approaching everyone with empathy, because you never know what they're dealing with. In general, that's a good way to approach it, but especially now. So really taking that time to talk to your stakeholders and approach them with empathy and really plan through that, I think is extremely important during the COVID-19 era.
I'll add on to that too a little bit. Empathy obviously goes a long way, but getting back to the point of like meeting your end users or your team where they are, when they are, content should be as consumable as possible. So if you're delivering any L&D content, or you're, you know, giving them a trailhead module, the more that you can give that people can do, maybe at 7 p.m. after they put their kids to bed, or 5 in the morning when they're like up drinking coffee, that need for flexibility is even more so, because not everybody can be contained in that 9 to 5 situation anymore. So the more you can do that's bite-sized and consumable, I think will go a long way, because they can be like, oh, I can just, you know, I could take this My Trailhead module this evening before I go to bed, you know, and be done with it in 20 minutes. And, you know, the next day, if they reflect on what they learned in that module, they can come to the team or whoever with questions on it. It's just meeting people where they are.
Yeah, I think those are both really good points. Empathy, again, we have a lot of personal change in our lives right now, and I think your point about I think we're hearing, for those with kids that are may or may not be going back to school right now, we're hearing a lot about asynchronous learning, right? Exactly. But it sounds like, again, that's a very important tactic in the corporate world as well, because not everybody's on the same 9 to 5 schedule anymore. We're not in the same offices anymore. So it's not maybe as simple as taking your, you know, a standing Tuesday call and turning that into change management, right? As it is to create content that, like you said, meets users where they are and that they can consume in their own time. Great feedback. Okay, well, I don't think we have any more questions, but I do, well, actually we did have one last minute entry here. The question comes down to, is peer pressure and adoption chart still a thing? So I guess the way I would read this question is wall of shame a good change management strategy?
Oh my, I have mixed emotions on that. I love competition. Like whenever you launch something new, make it competitive. Who's the first person to, log this first opportunity for this new product line or something like that? Um, you know, I think wall of shame should probably be left to managers to deal with and see. Like if you're trying to look at some of those adoption metrics, like who hasn't booked meetings or, who hasn't booked any pipeline. I mean, I'm very sales operations focused, but I'm not a fan of like calling people out negatively, especially in this COVID era. Like we all need some grace. So I think rewarding positive behavior goes a lot further than calling people out, unless you know the team that well and you can give a little nudge, maybe you can. But I'm not sure.
Oh my gosh. So I rolled out compliance training before, which is everyone's favorite, right? Everybody loves to take compliance training. But what I did, and to Liz's point, to kind of go through the managers, that kind of thing, we would send out reminders to everyone and all of that. There's always going to be a few, stragglers. And so I would do sort of like a behind the scenes outreach to their manager and just be like, hey, can you just check in with this person? And, see what's going on, if they need any help, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think to Liz's point, we need some grace. But, sometimes if you can make it a competition, that's good too, because then you kind of implicitly call them out. If you're like, look at Lizz, she was the first one to complete it, and then you have the leaderboard and I'm last, and I'm like, no. So yeah, I think that there's a different way to approach it depending on the team.
Yeah, we certainly didn't get too much into incentives and the value of positive incentives versus negative incentives, but I think it's a great way to kind of tie up that conversation on, especially in this time. I think you could debate the value of positive versus negative incentives, but especially now, I think keeping things as positive as we can and not putting any more undue stress or pressure on folks is giving them grace, like you said, and I think we could all use some. So Lizz and Sarah, this has been awesome. Thank you again for dropping so much knowledge on us today. Hopefully the attendees found it valuable as well. It sounds like they did. So again, Lizz and Sarah with Montage Learning, thanks again, and we'll see you all out in the community.
Thank you, Nick. We really appreciate the opportunity to meet with you and speak with all of the 10K customers about change management. Really appreciate it. And I'm so excited about like your COE and that you're like putting it forward for everybody to be able to consume your ebook. It's really good. So if y'all haven't checked it out,
check it out. It's great.
There's things that a solo admin or any admin can do today.
Yeah, well, for all of our career longevity, we want our companies to be using Salesforce for as long as possible, right? That's a good thing for all of us. So
exactly.
Let's work together to figure out how to make that happen.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right, have a great day.
Thanks. Bye.